من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم ولو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله إن الله يحب المتوكلين. صدق الله العظيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Putri Sekar, for the recitation of Al-Quran. Next is singing national anthem of Indonesia Raya and hymn of UIN Sunan Kalijaga by the committee. Time is yours. But before we sing the national anthem of Indonesia Raya, I ask all of audiences to stand up.
Kalau nanti kita yang paham atau ingat kembali para yang terus
Thank you for the committee. To all participants, may to take a seat. The next agenda is committee preface by Ms. Kusuma Sari Ayuding Tias, co-founder The Apex Chronicles. The time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks to Arum and Fahmi for the introduction and the opportunity. And hello everyone. Thank you for being here since 7 a.m. this morning. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Today, I am the co-founder of the Apex Chronicles, an independent media that focus on global issues, especially security issues. And I represent the committee of this international webinar, a collaboration between the Apex Chronicles, KPI UIN Sunan Kalijaga Yogyakarta, 17 Agustus University Surabaya, We have amazing team that organized this event since our first. We have an amazing teams that organized this event since our first international webinar last year in 2021. My appreciation and gratitude to the Honorable Dean of Dakwah and Communication, Profesor Dr. Marhumah, Head of KPI Studi Program, Bapak Nanang Miswar Hasim, our honorable speakers, Mbak Irine Himawari Gayatri, and Ibu Prihandari Satvikadewi from Indonesia, Dr. Ahmad Muhammady from Malaysia, and Professor Rommel Banlaoi from Philippines, who are here today to share their precious insight with us about political Islam's impact on government and society. And my sincere appreciation to all of our proud city participants, new college students of Islamic Broadcast and Communication of Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, and also 17 Agustus University Surabaya, the academics, the stakeholders, our media friends, and also our partners who dedicate their valuable time to participate in this international webinar and seminar. Today, we are holding this event in a hybrid way, online, also offline. And why this topic? Because we want to know how Islamic values influence the government, especially in political situations that control power, and to what extent it affects the society in Indonesia, Malaysia, and also Philippines. What kind of conflicts that may occur, and if they are related to the emergence of extreme right groups, radicalism, and terrorism in a country. And I hope all of us can get the benefit of the information we will get today. Once again, thank you very much to all those who have made this event happen. I shall pass the time to our master ceremony for today. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ms. Kusumasari Ayuning Tias. Move to the next agenda, that is welcoming speech given by Dean Faculty of Dakwah and Communication, Professor Dr. Hajah Emma Marhumah, MPD. The time is yours.
Thank you, Mas. Oh, thank you, Mas MC and MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Alladzi qala fi kitabihil karim. A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Fabima rahmatin minallahi lintalahum. Walau kunta fazzan ghalizal qalbi lam faddu min hawli. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa zurriyatihi ajma'in, amma ba'du. Your Excellency Bu Arum from APEC Chronic, Pak Nanang and team, Honorable our speaker in this international seminar, Bapak Dr. Ahmad Al-Muhammady, Assistant Professor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, from International Islam University, Malaysia, Ibu Irine Gayatri, PhD candidate at the Gender, Peace and Security Center School of Science Faculty of Art, Monash University, Australia. Professor Rommel Banlaoi, Chairman Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research, and President of Philippine Society for Intelligence and Security Studies. Sorry if I missed it. Prihandari Satvikadewi, Chairman of Center for Gender and Child Studies from UNTAD, Surabaya. All audience, ladies and gentlemen. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. First of all, praise and thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has given us mercies and blessing, so we can hear online in this international in politik, international webinar on political Islam impact on government and society. Secondly, I would like to say thanks to all committee to invite speaker to audience in this online webinar. While part of our international program, the purpose of this international webinar is to give academic space for scholar for share and present their ideas and research, so that we can learn from them, as well as for foster worldwide academic connections. Today's topic on the fate of political Islam, particularly in the context of Indonesia, is significant and relevant, as well as face the 2024 general election. We call general election. The scholarly discussion of the state religion relation, especially regarding the political Islam, is growing after the Indonesian political reformation. As many scholars have shown, the reformation have opened up space for the growth of competing political ideologies, including political Islamism, due to the freedom of speech and expression. Again, this context, democracy is utilized by many actors for various yet conflicting ends. Political Islam, or many scholars, call it the Islamists, seek the establishment of more Islamic society through the enforcement of certain version of Islamic law, imposing of the state level, influencing public discourse and policy-making process, especially on moral religious issues, I think. The question emergent on this context: what is explain the emergence of political Islam? How do they mobilize? What a political opportunity structure that facilitates their political mobilization? What is their impact of democracy in in general? What the impact, I think. Among the recent trends on Islamism as studied by scholars are conservatism turn, like from Martin van Brenizen, and the rise of Islamic conservatism. These theses come up and gaining ground, especially after the unprecedented event or the 212 movement against Ahok, the biggest Islamist mobilization throughout Indonesian history, I think. Yeah, scholar Jew that political Islam has profoundly posed a challenge to Indonesian pluralism. This can be seen from religious hatred and polarization, identity politics, discrimination against minority religious group, etc., etc. The threat of political Islamism ahead of the 2024 is also rising due to the uncertainty of political constellation. Finally, the international webinar again is significant, very, very significant, yeah, to address this issue. And we believe that with perspective and experience, we can learn from our speaker. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wallahul muwaffiq ila aqwamit thariq. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the welcoming speech. Next is praying, which will be delivered by Mr. Muhammad Diakudin Emsos. The time is yours.
إلى هذه النية الصالحة ولصفة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة. الحمد لله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد والحمد لله رب العالمين. حمدا شاكرين حمدا ناعمين حمدا يوافي ويكافي مزيدا. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد مسنة تنجينا بها من جميع الآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتغنى بها من جميع الشيئات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أوصل الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الموت. اللهم اجعلنا وأولادنا من أهل العلم وأهل الخير ولا تجعلنا وإياهم من أهل الشر والضير إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم يا من هو في علمه كائنون يا من هو في ذاته قديمون يا من هو في مجده منون. اللهم أكرمنا منك من الفهم وأخرجنا منك من ظلمة وهم وارزقنا فهم نبينا وحفظ المرسلين وإلهاما ملائكة المقربين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. يا إلهنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وسلمنا في دنيانا وأخرنا. يا رب بالمصطفى بلغ مقاصدنا بلغ مقاصدنا يا واسع الكرمين يا واسع الجود. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. سبحانك ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. بسر الفاتحة.
Thank you for the praying. Ladies and gentlemen, here the next agenda is main session of the International Webinar 2022 presented by Communication and Islamic Broadcasting, in collaboration with Apex Chronicles, also 17 Agustus University Surabaya, by the topic Political Islam's Impact on Government and Society.
So let us introduce you our speakers today. First speaker is Miss Irine Gayatri from Indonesia. The second speaker is Mr. Dr. Ahmad Muhammady from Malaysia. And the third speaker is Mr. Professor Rommel Banlaoi from Philippines. And the fourth speaker is AAI Prihandari Satvikadewi from Indonesia. So this plenary session will be guided by the moderator Nur Fadilah Andini. Before we start this session, let us introduce you our moderator. Nur Fadilah Andini, also known as Andin, is a third-year active student in Communication and Islamic Broadcasting, State Islamic University, Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. She is one of the delegates of Asia Student Exchange and Conference Program on 2022 and also won the Best Design Project of Asia Pacific Youth Camp on 2020. She is also a debater and currently won 4 debate competitions in this year. She is now a secretary of International Student of Dakwah and Communication Faculty. And she is also a content creator staff in Indonesia Siang Excellence Scholarship Foundation or Bumi Schooler.
Those are the profile of our moderator today. And to Andin, time is yours.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say one more time, welcome to the third series of International Webinar 2022, presented by Communication and Islamic Broadcasting in collaboration with Apex Chronicles. Thank you for the Master of Ceremonies. And now we talk about by the topic, Political Islam's Impact on Government and Society. Indeed, it's a very honor for me to be here as a moderator who will conduct the main session of our webinar with an interesting topic and of course with our distinguished and special speakers today. So yeah, before we going to in depth about the topic, I would like to remind all of the audience here that in the end of the session, there will be a questions and answer. So all of us are allowed to ask any related questions to the speakers. Then I suggest you prepare your notes and pay attention to the presented topic later on. Here we are. We have speakers from Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines will graciously add their experience and expertise to this webinar. Okay, first of all, let me introduce you about the topic. Based on the Charles Erskine, over the last few decades, Islam has become a central point of reference for a wide range of political activities, arguments, and opposition movements. The term political Islam has been adopted by many scholars in order to identify this seemingly unprecedented eruption of Islam religion into the secular domain of politics and thus to distinguish this practice from the forms of personal piety, belief, and ritual conventionally assumed that Western scholarship under the unmarked category Islam. In the brief comments that follow, I suggest why we might need to rethink this basic framework. Well, talking about the political Islam, which is our main issue in this webinar, indeed is a very complicated and hard issue, but interesting to discuss for me personally and from us commonly, right? What kind of influence that Islamic values have in the government, specifically in politically and situation that control power, and what extent it affects the society in each country? What kind of conflicts can occur? Also, is it possible if they were related to the emergence of extreme right groups, radicalism, or terrorism in the country? Well, we hope that this webinar will be able to answer these questions and provide an overview of what can be done to provide solutions of the problems. The stakeholders, researchers, and journalists who will be the speaker for this webinar together with the Apex Chronicles are experts involved in the eradication and rehabilitation of terrorism in the 3 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we find out it from our speaker's presentation, which will be able to provide on a review of what political Islam's impact on government and society. But first of all, let me introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Ahmad Al Muhammady. He is an assistant professor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilizations. Besides that, he holds various external positions, such as Associate Fellow at International Center for Counterterrorism, The Hague, Netherlands, International Advisory Committee member at the Global Peace Institute, United Kingdom. Since 2011, he works closely with the Special Branch Counterterrorism Division, Royal Malaysia Police and Prison Department to implement the rehabilitation and the radicalization programs for individuals detained under terrorism laws in Malaysia. Ahmad is also member of the education panel and expert or specialist appointed by the Ministry of Home Affairs from cases investigated under the Security Offense, Special Measures, Act SOSMA 2012, and the Prevention of Terrorism, Act OPTA 2015. Prior to that, he was a consultant to the United Nations Development Program, co-authored a report of the written Foreign Tourism Fighters South Asia. He is now a co-principal investigator for 2 years research at the Extremism Analytical Unit in collaboration with National Consortium for the Study Terrorism and Responses of Terrorism, University of Maryland. Okay, to Dr. Ahmad, are you here?
Yeah.
Dr. Ahmad, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly here.
Yes.
How are you today?
Yes, very good. Very good. Thank you very much, Sister Nur Fadila, for your introduction.
Okay, but first of all, let me introduce, you can call me Andin, Doctor. Hello, can you hear me?
You repeat again?
Okay, so what the subtopic that you want to talk today, Dr. Ahmad?
Today I'm going to speak on the future of political Islam in Southeast Asia by looking at the appeal, at the sustainability, and also the challenges that the political Islam has in the Southeast Asia. And I will focus to Malaysia, Indonesia, and also maybe in the Philippines and the Southern Thai.
Okay, so I think all of the audience are so excited for looking for the submaterial for you, Doctor, and time is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Sister Moderator, Nur Fadila and Dini, for the introduction and also for moderating the session. And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Honorable Professor Dr. Hajjah Marhumah, Dean of Da'wah and Communication, Faculty, Universiti Islam Negeri Sunan Kalijaga, Indonesia, and also the Universitas 17 Agustus, Surabaya, Indonesia, and the Apex Chronicles, and also the partner Nara Mizwan Hashim, the head of the programs, the speakers, Irine, Gayatri, Professor Rommel Banlaoi, and also Satvikadewi from Indonesia, and also the participant from all over the country in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and also in the Southeast Asia. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me, especially the APEC Chronicles, and also the collaborators, that is University Islam Negeri Sunan Kalijaga and also the Universitas 17 Agustus, especially my dear friends Ayung Tias from the Chronicle, Apex Chronicle, for organizing this event and also to speak about these very, very important subjects. My topic today is the future of political Islam in Southeast Asia. As I said, I'm going to look at the appeal, the sustainability and challenges. If we can move to the next slide. Basically, the scope of the discussion is going to look at, we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So the presentation will discuss the future of political Islam, focusing on the three major themes: why it become an appealing narrative today, and why it is sustainable, and what are the challenges that they face. So in doing so, I may provide a little bit historical overview which led to the emergence of political Islam and why it has become an attraction and sustained over a long period of time, and the challenges that they face in contemporary world. So I'm going to give you a brief historical overview of this so that we can provide a fair historical background to this phenomena. Okay. Next slide. When we talk about historical background, how political Islam started in the first place. So we have to look at, in order to understand the phenomena of political Islam, we have to understand how Islam emerged. That is Islam from the prophetic era up to the downfall of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. If you look at the history of Muslim from the beginning, especially from the era kerasulan, era kerasulan ataupun period kerasulan yang bermula ataupun started from 613 and is ended in 632, and then it is followed by the period of Khulafa ur-Rashidun. There are four Khalifa. They call it known as the Khulafa ur-Rashidun, from 632 until 661, and then it is followed by Umayyah period. That is another period that we have in Islamic history, Abbasid, and the last, the Caliphate, is the Ottoman. There is a reason why I have to mention this development, is because that served as the foundation and the rationale for the development of political Islam that we have today. So Islam started with a very, very small group of people during prophetic era, and it grows to become a community, very big community in Mecca, and then it's moved to Medina, and then it spread to the whole Arabia. And after that, during Umayyad, Abbasid, and Ottoman, it's become a great empire. So in the past, this is the narrative that you can see happen again and again in any Islamic revivalist movement, and also political Islam. They're returning to the glory of Islam because they say that we used to be a great power, a hegemonic power in the past for almost 1,500 years. So this is the basis. Okay, now what happened after 1924? I think this is the very, very critical point. Next slide. So in the post-Ottoman Caliphate, and then it's led to the Islamic revivalist movement. So, after the downfall of Ottoman Caliphate in 1924, it started with the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916. We can see that the emergence of revivalist movement, or it is known as Sahwatul Islamiyah, in response to colonization and in order to reclaim the lost legacy of Islam. So this is the narrative. One is a response to colonization, and the other one is to reclaim the lost legacy of Islam. Because, as I said earlier, Muslim used to be the hegemonic power in the past for almost 1,500 years, and after 1924, it is over. So after 1924, there is an emergence of a Sahwat al-Islamiyah. in response to colonization and in order to reclaim the lost legacy of Islam. I think that we are going to see the similar pattern today. What is next? Next slide. Now, if you look at the approaches, I think this is related with Professor Marhuma mentioned about the emergence of political Islam with different identities, different approaches, different strategy in Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia. So similarly, we can see different approaches adopted by Sahwah movement. So Islamic revivalist movement, As-Sahwat al-Islamiyah, emerged and adopted different approaches to deal with the new realities. What that happened after 1924. What is the new realities? What were the new realities? Colonization, the emergence of nation state, and the emergence or the arrival of foreign political ideologies, disintegration of the ummah, the economic backwardness. These are the new realities. So As-Sahwat al-Islamiyah emerged to deal and to tackle these issues, and at the same time to reclaim what it is called as the lost legacy of Islam. Next slide. Now, this is where it is getting more interesting. So we can see, for example, groups such as Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Okay, everybody knows Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Hizb ut-Tahrir, I think Hizb ut-Tahrir also a very big organization in Indonesia. And Jama'at al-Tabligh, among the earliest that emerged after 1924. And they adopted various approaches such as education approach, welfare approach, da'wah approach. Some of them also involved in social work and later political participation in democratic process, as what is known today as political Islam. And their sole objective is returning to the original teaching of Islam and reclaiming the lost legacy. So you can see that they have tried various approach. They have tried various approach in order to achieve the goal of reclaiming the lost legacy, to return to the original, Ar-Ruju' ila manhaj salafus salih. If you read Jama'ah Islamiyah, if you listen to Ustaz Abu or Abu Bakr Ashir, they are going to speak the same thing. Next. If you have access to Arabic text, you try to find this book. It is known as Da'wah al-Muqawamah al-Islamiyah al-Alamiyah. It is written by well-known Al-Qaeda ideologue, who it is very interesting book, and then it has been translated into English by Jim Lacey. It's contained of 1,600 pages written by Abu Mus'ab as-Suri, that is Al-Qaeda ideologue. And that is, in that book, it's outlined the history of Islamic revivalist movement. To me, this is very, very interesting work that you can refer to. Next. Now, why jihadi narrative becomes so appealing? Because, as I said, some of those Islamic As-Sahwat al-Islamiyah later on adopted jihadi narrative or jihadi approach. So it's happened because, it's happened because all approaches have failed. They say that, you know, we have tried education, we have tried da'wah, we have tried welfare, we have tried political Islam, all has failed. Now it is the time for us to adopt jihadi approach through armed struggle. So this is how they move to armed struggle, and especially in facing colonization. And some of them facing not only colonization, when colonization is over, they also, for example, I think in the case of Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia, we have groups such as Darul Islam group. We have Jama'ah Islamiyah group that adopted the jihadi, so-called jihadi approach to the armed struggle in order to reinstate the position of Islam in the state. Next. Some group, okay, now we come to the political Islam. Some group adopted political approaches. That is through political participation and democratic process, or the political Islam. So you see here, some of them become jihadi groups, some of them become political parties. Okay, they involved in political process. I think in Malaysia, in Indonesia, we have Islamic-oriented political parties. Next. So it manifests in the emergence of various Islamic-oriented political parties across the Muslim world. And as I said, in Indonesia they have, in Malaysia we have, and in Middle East they have, it is in Algeria, They have this in Lebanon, in Syria, in many Arab world. They adopted, or in Jordan, they joined political parties. Before this, they never joined political parties. So now they say that we have to go to political parties as a solution, So they believe that this is the best approach. Next. Now, there is a counter narrative to political Islam, and some group especially, especially the jihadi group or the extremist group, they say that democracy is incompatible with Islam. You cannot accept democracy. And they even blame those people who accept democracy as Taghut. I remember when I analyzed the discourse of Ustaz Abu Bakar Bashir in Indonesia, which is being translated, being used also by some jihadi group in Malaysia. Ustaz Abu rejected democracy. They say that this is a Taghut system. And then Pancasila, before, he was talking about this as the representation of Taghut, as the representation of idol. Before this, we have idols in Mecca and Medina. Today, we don't have that one, but we have political system known as democracy. And democracy is actually you elevating the status of man as a lawmaker, meaning that you appointed man as God as a lawmaker. So to understanding of Ustaz Abu, this is unacceptable. But I think recently he changed his mind. I think we'll talk about this later on. So democracy is a man-made political system, and therefore it is not acceptable. Next. Next slide. Now, there are some cases happen, the crackdown on political Islam, because they are suspicious against political Islam and led to the crackdown of political Islamic movement. And this happened in some countries in Middle East. For example, the authoritarian ruling government in Egypt cracked down against the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and also after the arrival of Morsi on political scene in Egypt, it was toppled by the military coup. So they believe that political Islam is anti-states or antithesis to the state, to the interests of the state, and therefore it need to be removed from power. It's happening in Algeria, in Fis, Islamic political fronts in Fis, Abbas Madani. It's also happened in some other places. So they say that we have a suspicious against political Islam, therefore they cannot be in power. Next. Now, what happened? Political Islam goes underground. So in facing the crackdown, they went underground and some adopted terrorist approaches. So I think this is the danger. Whenever there is some crackdown against political Islam, because they say that you do not give me an opportunity. You don't give me an opportunity to be a legitimate political party. Therefore, they say that's fine. I will go underground. I will adopt terrorist approach. This is what happened in Algeria. This is what happened in Egypt, because they say that the state does not recognize their political legitimacy or their reason to be in legitimate political system. They will go underground and they will fight against the state. Okay, next. Now, the appeal and sustainability of political Islam is because, number one, is the narrative of returning to Islam. I think they will bring the narrative. Okay, all of us, they would say, all of us are Muslim. We have to return back to the original teaching of Islam. If you listen to this narrative, you can hear a lot of Islamic political parties, Islamic-oriented political parties, all Islamic revivalist movement, including a person like Ustaz Abu, Ustaz Sulaiman Aman Abdul Rahman, and all his friends. They will talk about the returning to the original teaching of Islam, and they use the word manhaj salafus salih, ar-ruju' ila manhaj salafus salih. And then the next point is the failure of states' governance and political system. When domestically, in domestic politics, the state failed to address certain issues. So when state failed to address certain issue which involve the interests of the public, this group will exploit this. I think we have to be very, very sensitive to certain issues that involve the public interest. Corruption, for example, failure to address poverty, failure to address the welfare of the public. And some injustices committed. I heard recently when there is I think currently in Indonesia, there is the Ferdi Sambo's case, and his involvement in a lot of other illegal activities has been claimed by the news, and some of them associated his activity with the cases which involve the members of Islamic movement in Indonesia. The murder case, I think it's happened in Jakarta. There are 7 people were killed in the shootout in Jakarta. They said that this is because of the corruption. This is because of the, they can stage what happened in there. So there are cases like this, and the state need to address this properly. If not, then it can be exploited to become a very, very saleable narrative and a viable alternative to extremist narrative. So some people do not go to the extent of joining terrorist group. They would say, okay, I will join the certain political party which has Islamic inclination. Next point. So I think I'm moving towards the end now. Okay, next. Next slide, please. Now, to me, engaging political Islam is very important because some contemporary dominant narrative generate fear-mongering about political Islam than directly engaging them in the discourse and dialogue. Because as I said, state launch a crackdown will force them to go underground and to be extremists, to say the least, and terrorists if we are not lucky. So if we afraid of them and saying that we have to deal with them in the harsh way, we do not engage with them in the meaningful discourse and dialogue, they will go underground. And let them to adopt, however, it's also let them to adopt a revisionist approach. Is democracy, political Islam really a solution? They would say, are we really on the right path? Because whenever we join politics, the state is launch a crackdown against us. So they would say, let us go underground. So I think that is the danger. Okay, next. So contemporary dominant narrative often speak about the impact of political Islam to political system, government, and society. I think the conference, the theme of the conference suggests that what would be the impact of political Islam to political system, to the status quo, especially to government, to society, meaning that whenever they join, meaning that whenever political Islam join politics, what would be the impact to the state? What would be the impact to the society, to the government? Well, to me, it is a valid point to some extent. Yes, it is a valid point. However, we also need to consider the impact of the existing political system to political Islam. We also need to consider that, meaning that to what extent, meaning whenever political Islam join political system, existing political system, what would be the impact or the implication of the existing political system to political Islam? Okay, we never consider that. We always talk about the impact of political Islam to political system. Now, I want to invite you to invert your thinking, to look at what are the impact of our system, meaning that what are the impact of Pancasila to political Islam. I mentioned about this because after I listened to interview of Ustaz Abu Bakar Ba'ashir in Indonesia, I was very shocked to see he was attending celebration of Indonesian independence. Many people might be shocked to see his appearance in that celebration, including myself. I say that this is unbelievable, but this is the impact of Pancasila to political Islam and also to Islamic revivalist movement. There are some impact. We never speak about the impact of that to political Islam. I think we also need to consider that beside talking about the impact of political Islam to our political system. Because whenever we have direct engagement, whenever we have their participation in democratic process, to some extent, is also impact political Islam. So that is my argument. Okay, next. So Olivia Roy mentioned about the failure of political Islam, meaning that whenever political Islam join politics, they cannot be implementing the whole idea. I have seen this happen in Malaysia. For example, we have Islamic-oriented political parties that promoting the idea of the Islamic State. Right now, they say that we no longer speak about Islamic states discourse. We talk about welfare state. We talk about peaceful coexistence and so on and so forth. Right now, Islamic political party in Malaysia become the government. Have you seen any Islamic law has been implemented in Malaysia? We don't see any of this. So there is an impact of existing political system, because whenever they become government, they know what to, they know the realities. They know actually their strengths and weaknesses. So political Islam may adopt, I would call this as a strategy repositioning to face the new political realities whenever they become government, especially. Therefore, direct engagement is viable approach than the use of other approach. And my final take is this, last slide. Next slide, last one. Political Islam in Southeast Asia is this. It has sustained interest, meaning that Muslim will have a sustained interest in political Islam in Southeast Asia, resulting from its narrative itself, as I said, narrative to return to the original teaching of Islam, and the state systemic failure to address certain human problems facing the common people in the state. And second point is the state approach in dealing with political Islam determines their reaction and what the way forward to be an alternative political discourse, or they will become violent extremists. So it is the state approach, how to deal with them will determine whether they will become an alternative political Islam or political discourse, or they will go for violent extremists, meaning that they will become a terrorist group. I think that's all my presentation this morning. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that my sharing this morning would be useful, and I wish you all the best for the discussion. I hand over to moderator. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad Muhammady, for the gorgeous presentation. Okay, I would like to open the Q&A session for all of the audience. If you have any question, or if you have something you want to ask about the presentation that Dr. Ahmad Muhammady gave, you can raise your hand, or you can turn on your camera, or raise your hand on the Zoom. Okay, if there is no question, I mean, all of the students are too shy, doctor, for asking to you. Okay, let me ask a question, sir.
You can ask in Bahasa and also in Indonesian language also. I can understand it.
They're too excited for joining this webinar, and I think they're so nervous also because this is their first time for using English in full international webinar. So I think this is their first experience. So yeah, okay. I want to ask you something, sir. What is the most effective way to counter the narratives that spread using the political Islam narration?
Well, my question to you is, I mean, there are two parts of my response to your question. Number one is, what point that we can counter? Why should we counter their narrative? Because we have to ask ourselves, is their narrative dangerous? Is their narrative dangerous? Because we also have to remember, whenever they join political process, they become part of democratic process, democratic system, meaning that they believe in they believe in democracy, they believe in the freedom of expression, they believe in the right to opinion, right to civil liberties, and so on and so forth. Are we going to deny that right by stopping them from sharing their point of view? Now we say to ourselves, we say to the public, we believe in democracy. We believe in democratic process, meaning that we will give them the space to speak their mind, to express their opinion, to express their thinking, their ideas. Whenever they express their ideas, and you are going to say, we are going to counter that. I mean, they are going to say, you are speaking about freedom, but why do you limit our freedom? I think that's the challenge. So we have to remember, we give them the space, but whenever they speak their mind. Now, if you close down their space, if you shut down the space to express opinion, they will go underground. They will say, I will become terrorist group. It is better because my voice will not be heard as a legitimate political discourse, a political narrative. So we have to ask ourselves again, what basis that we should counter? Now, if that discourse is dangerous, of course, we have freedom, but there is a limit to freedom. There is a limit to certain ideas, especially if it is against, in the context of Indonesia, it is against Pancasila. If it is against Pancasila, it is against public order, security, and harmony. We have to stop that. And this is the role of, instead of countering, why don't we talk? Why don't we engage? Because in my view, a group like Taliban in Afghanistan, in the beginning, people are so scared of them. Right now, they start opening up. Maybe it is not fully open up, but they start to speak to the world after realizing that, look, we have been fighting for a very long time. And right now, I think it's time for us to talk instead of fighting. So in Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, I speak to former terrorists. I do not shout. I do not argue. We discuss, we have conversation, we exchange ideas. Sooner or later, there would be a dent, there would be an impact because we talk. So sometimes to change things, you don't have to shout, you have to whisper. It is much more effective than shouting and the bullet. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor, for the great answers. Okay. Next, I see on the Zoom there is a speaker raise hand. Miss Irene.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Thank you for my best colleagues and friends, and also senior academicians. Maybe here we see Professor Ahmad and also Professor Dean from the faculty. And also I extend my gratitude for all students who participated in this forum. First, I would like to maybe a bit express my gratitude because I could follow Dr. Ahmed's speech since the beginning, although I had to turn my camera on and off, and that I'm still in Melbourne. So I apologize if probably sometimes the connection is not that good, but I have one or two comments pertaining your speech, and I think I should use my time effectively because I will be continue to deliver my speech. First, I would like also to mention that complementing your discussion about how the state should approach the violent, or how the state should probably extend dialogue first or talk with the parties or organizations who turn into jihadism other than political Islam. I would like also to mention that Indonesia basically is not only a country that adhere Pancasila as the basic norm or ground norm. It was a reality which had been accepted since before the Independence Day. And that was formulated by the agreement of a variety of organizations, not only the Islam communities or ummah or leaders in that time. So Sukarno had discussed this with other leaders, the revolutionary leaders, anti-colonialism. And during that was shaped the Indonesia state as we know today. That being said, the Islam values, the positive ones, have been ingrained in the society, but also affected the governance system. So that's why when the Indonesian government applied two approaches, the hard approach and the soft approach that we already knew as the preventive of violent extremism, that created, of course, it created or it invited controversies in the beginning, but then support came from the grassroots communities, including the Islamic groups. I will elaborate this particular section later on, but the second point is that Pancasila, as we know it, actually also had been embraced by the Islam communities. So not only a jargon, it's not only a jargonistic saying. So when Abu Bakar Bashir declared that he returned to Pancasila, it is actually something that is not, that we can simply ignore.
Yeah.
This is a political reality and also can be an example, a good example for a nation which built upon the heterogeneity of identities and beliefs. So other than in our constitution, we adhere three major Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christian, Catholic, but also Hinduism, Buddhism, and maybe hundreds of non-major religions as the sociological reality. That is what the state trying to protect. So when I, as a Muslim, grown up in a moderate Muslim family, I will not see myself egoistically as only voicing the voice of part of the Islam Ummah, but I position myself as part of the wider Indonesian citizen. That is why I think it is good to see from both sides. I will take up an example. Third example, political Islam is, I agree, one of a middle way in order to channel freedom of expression and also freedom of association protected by the fourth constitution amended in, I think it was 2000 or 2001, after the 1998 political reform. So what shaped Indonesian citizens' expression, political expression today, could not be diverted from the historical conjecture after the demise of the longest authoritarian regime in 1998, which also invited backlash from the jihadist political organization. They found channel in the democratic liberalism. They found the expression unhealthy. On the other hand, the political Islam group, for instance, are also taken up as part of their freedom of expression culture. But what had happened, sometimes they negated the heterogeneity of the society. Because maybe our dean in her speech for this session had mentioned a particle of how the political Islam movement went wrong during the 2016 local election of Ahok versus Anies Baswedan. Completely out of the state of sanity of Indonesian citizen, where the identity and also symbolism were collapsed and clashed in the electoral campaign. Also added to another somehow often cherry-picked symbolism returning to the old flagrant of post-Cold War anti-communist genre, which is voiced by a particular political Islam group. So I think as long as Indonesia is still facing this as part of their realities as a heterogeneous nation, it is good if the preventive action is there, dialogue is there, but also the state still needs to maintain the traditional security approach, because that is the mandate of the state. And I think in Malaysia too, the Malaysian approach in terms of the security approach toward threat are still exist. But in Indonesia, luckily, I think in Malaysia as well, the civil society and also instrument of check and balances in the installed democratic system, which is also agreed by the Muslim communities, are still there. So at least for a minimum, we can still have hopes in the democracy. And I think in this regard, political Islam group also have room to always extend dialogue as part of the culture. I think that is only my comment. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam. Can I respond to that?
Yes, of course.
I think Irene has mentioned, share a very wonderful point that I completely agree. 2 points at least. Number one is, as mentioned also by Professor Dr. Mahmouda, I admit and acknowledge the existence of, as Irene mentioned, the particle of extremism or DNA in certain political Islam group, not only in Indonesia, but also in Malaysia and many parts of the Muslim world. There are certain extremist particles in them, and that actually make this political system in certain country heat up and conflictual. That's number one. Yes, I agree with you on that point. And we also can see the same thing happen in there. And then number two, of course, I also agree that the state need to adopt soft and hard approach. That is prevention. Of course, in Malaysia, we have preventive laws regarding the security. I think Indonesia also have. And we also need to extend dialogue, meaning that we have to open both ways. One is as the deterrence. We adopt deterrence approach. There are certain preventive law being adopted if this political Islam group or any other group that operate within or beyond the constitution, beyond the laws, then prevention has to be taken. But I still believe also dialogue need to be taken seriously, because, and I think it is done very growing very well in the context of Indonesia, the culture of dialogue, the culture of tolerance, the culture of conversation. And I think by having this, we can prevent this group from going underground and they created more problem. But regarding the position, Ustaz Abu Bakr Bashir, I think if you ask me, is this change authentic change or tactical change? I would say it's a tactical change rather than actual change, because he said that we accept Pancasila, and by doing so we accept Islam, and if we accept Islam, then we accept the implementation of Sharia, meaning that he did not leave out at all Sharia in his thinking, meaning that I would say is a tactical change in that regard. And there is a question here, I think in the chat from Anas, who asked about the politicization of religion. I think this is a problem. Islam is bigger than politics. It is not only about politics. Islam is the wholesome of system of life. But a certain group politicize Islam, meaning that making use of religion as a political, as a vehicles, as an instrument to achieve political power. And they're going to use any kind of religious justification to achieve it. And I think this is wrong. I think it's happened in many parts of the Muslim world. They politicize Islam. Instead of Islamization of politics, they reverse the process, politicization of Islam. So what is going on sometimes is not Islamization of politics, meaning that to live as Muslim in political system, but to politicize the Islamic teaching in order to gain political power, and they infuse it together with Machiavellian politics. So whenever you say that politicization of Islam, definitely you are using Machiavellian way and justifies the means way of achieving political power. And because of that, according to Anas, he said that the secular idea seems to be acceptable. Yes, I would agree, because whenever people start using religion for the sake of politics, they're gonna hate religion, and they're gonna go to the argument saying that it is better to have a secular state. It is better to have Pancasila as an alternative, not political Islam as being proposed by the group. Yeah, I think that would be the reaction. Why? It is because of the politicization of politics. And Olivia Roy, I mentioned in my presentation just now, Olivia Roy has mentioned about the same thing, why political Islam failed because of the politicization of Islam rather than living or implementing Islam truly in their life. Because Islam is not only about politics, Islam is about personal life. Islam about interaction with others, respecting other religion, and living together in harmoniously in a society. So it's not only about having power and forcing Islam upon other people. So that's my take on the question by Anas. I'm not sure my question, the question from Muhammad Lutfi Habibi, in Indonesia, Islamic politics revived after the fall of New Order, which was marked by the shift of democratic system and the rise of political parties in political contestation. My question is, how about in Malaysia? Was Islamic political movement also triggered by major event that affect the state system? Thank you in advance. Yes. The emergence of political Islam in Malaysia also happened somewhere in 70s. But it comes in two forms. One as the da'wah movement. For example, we have the Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, ABIM, is a kind of Islamic movement that focusing on da'wah, focusing on welfare, focusing on education. But we also have Islamic political parties that have the idea, it is better to have a political party based on Islamic values. And the student or the founder of this group, they received this, they inspired from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood or Islam Ikhwan al-Muslimin. They created political parties. So, and then we also have a domestic political event. For example, the certain political ideologies of the secular group inside the country, and this led to the formation of political Islam. So I would say the experience in Malaysia is a combination of domestic imperative, domestic factors, and global factors, especially what's going on in the Muslim world in the 70s, and especially after the rise, after the Iranian Revolution. I think, Irene, you study about this, the impact of the Iranian Revolution to Southeast Asia and also to the political Islam. And of course, it is because of the certain political event that happened within the country itself. Just like in Indonesia after the fall of a new order, there are events. For example, if you want to read about it, you can Google Peristiwa Mamali in Kedah. Peristiwa Mamali is a very, very bloody conflict that happened in Malaysia, and then it's led to the strengthening of political Islam in Malaysia. Thank you. Moderator, you're mute.
Okay, am I audible now?
Can hear
Okay.
you now. Yeah.
Okay. I would like to ask the students all here. I would like to ask the all here. Are you guys want to ask something to Dr. Ahmad? No. Mungkin teman-teman ada yang mau bertanya, biar aku yang translate.
Ya, silakan. Saya boleh memahami bahasa Indonesia.
Nah, tuh. Dr. Ahmad said, ya, paham bahasa Indonesia kok. Okay, the students look so nervous, Doctor.
Okay.
Sepertinya mereka nervous sekali.
Baik.
Okay, thank you so much for the amazing answers and presentation from the Dr. Muhammady.
Can I say last word?
Yes.
I would like to say my last remarks. I'm very happy to attend this conference. Okay, so there is a question, I think, no, the impact of politics in government. Okay, I think that's a comment. So I would say I want to thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to attend the Apex Chronicle and then the conference, which is I attended last year, and I'm very happy with the question, with all participation. And I want to wish you all the best. And I actually cannot stay because I have another meeting after this, and I look forward to meet you again next year. I think with that, thank you very much again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wait, I'm sorry, Professor Ahmad, my friend Murnir Kartono sent his regards to you.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. He wished for a dua because his kid is having an illness now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmad. And I think that's all from Dr. Ahmad El Muhammady. Thank you so much for delivering the presentation and attending this webinar today. Okay, we move to the next speaker. Miss Irene, are you here? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, am I audible, Miss?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, before Miss Irene to deliver her presentation, I would like to read the short bio from Miss Irene. Irene is currently a PhD candidate at the Gender Peace and Security GPS Center, School of Science, Faculty of Arts, Monash University, Support and Australia Award Scholarship. She is also a senior researcher at the National Research and Innovation Agency, PREIN in Indonesia. Irene obtained her MA from the Department of Peace and Conflict Research, Uppsala University, Sweden. From 2017 until 2018, Irene joined a small team led by National Counterterrorism Agency, BNPT, in developing the draft for National Action Plan on countering preventing violent extremism in Indonesia. The Indonesia's National Plan of Action on Countering Violent Extremism and that leads to terrorism and launched in January 2021. Between 2007 to 2014, together with the Coalition of Anti-Gender-Based Violence, she supported the adoption of UNCR in 1325 into Indonesia's National Action Plan of Women Empowerment and Protection of Children in Social Conflict. Wow, you're so amazing, Miss Irene. So how are you today, Miss?
I'm good, thank you very much. How are you? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you are audible. Okay, Miss, may I know you, where are you right now? Are you in Indonesia or are you in Australia?
I'm in Australia, to be precise. I'm in my campus, Monash University in Clayton in Melbourne.
Okay, Miss, what's time there? Is the evening or?
It's now here 12:27 p.m. So it is faster 3 hours from Jakarta at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, Miss, what the subtopic you want to deliver for your presentation today?
Oh, okay. So the topic that I would like to present is actually complementing what Dr. Ahmad just mentioned. So as part of the Indonesian citizen, as part of the Indonesian woman studied in higher education, I would like to present the topic regarding the political roles of Indonesian women in collective efforts to prevent violent extremism, to prevent religious-based violent extremism.
Okay, so it's about women's political role to encourage religious tolerance to build peace in Indonesia, right?
No, it's the title is slightly changed, but the essence is, of course, it's to protect tolerance and to promote peace building. So the title is The Political Role of Indonesian Women in Collective Efforts to Prevent Religious-Based Violent Extremism.
Okay, so I think without any further ado, all the students also so excited for waiting your presentation. So to Miss Irene, the time is yours.
Okay, so sorry, should I share the slide or the committee will share the slide?
The committee will share it for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, Miss.
Is the slide already shared?
To the committee. Wait for.
I mean for the audience. Should I just read it?
Okay, I think there's a trouble here, Miss. Can you share it directly?
But it won't share, only the host can share in this meeting.
Oh, can you make Miss Irene the co-host? Okay, Miss, wait, we will make you be a co-host. Okay, Miss, is it?
Wait a second. One from, yeah, wait a second.
Okay.
I need to connect this first.
Okay, it's okay, Miss. Take your time.
All right. Wait, I failed to.
Oke, untuk teman-teman mungkin bisa didengar
Now
ya
I can do it.
dan menyiapkan pertanyaan.
Alright, so
Irene.
can you see my screen?
Yes.
Right now? Okay. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues, researcher, academic professors, but also my dear students, friends, new friends. And I would like also to share my gratitude for the people of the Coordination, the place that I studied now in Australia. I also want to share my appreciation to the host of this very important event, the Apex Chronicles, in collaboration with the Islamic Communication Broadcasting Study Program, Faculty of Da'wah and Communication, State Islamic University Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, and my dear friend Kusumasari Ayunitas, whom at first contacted me and asked me to involve in this very important event. I also wanted to share several of my individual gratitude. I think this is the right time for us to learn more about the history, our involvement in creating a more constructive terminologies or interpretation of what is political Islam, because definitely Islam community or Ummah anywhere in the world, including in Indonesia, cannot dissect their daily roles or cannot separate themselves from politics. This being said, I think it is important to shape the more politics into more constructive and positive way. Otherwise, we won't lead in a good example towards the society, in the society. And by the society, I mean not only a very narrow-minded society like nation state, but also global. Be that in mind, that is actually my motivation to present this topic to the audience for today's event, titled Political Role of Indonesian Women in Collective Efforts to Prevent Religious-Based Violent Extremism. All right, where's the next slide? So the background, and this is not only part of my concern as part of the Indonesian citizen, as part of the women among the Indonesian citizens, and as part of the, again, Nahdlatul Ulama community, as my family also part of Nahdlatul Ulama community. But at a bigger level, this is also my topic, which I followed very dearly since I was joining the team years ago, but also as part of the Think and Act in solidarity with the victims of the Surabaya bombing. So what is the background of this paper I will introduce to you. Violent extremism is carried out by a group of people with a destructive purposes that negates the existence of other groups' identities. From Dr. Ahmad, we had heard a partial element on why a willing to join religious movement turned bad into a negative dimension of jihadism, which is struck some part of the society globally. In Indonesia, this phenomenon also took place several times, even before the current decade started with the first and the biggest one, 2002 incident, I think. In the process, this global act of violence involved the recruitment process of women with the lure of jihad, heaven, and amalia, which were normalized for this particular group. Indonesia in this context cannot be separated from this trend. It can be seen from the increase in acts of religious-based violence that took place in the period of 2018, if we look back in several recent years, in which young women were perpetrators of the violence. The Surabaya bombing could be caught as a culminative point, and it was a turning point for discussing a more gender-sensitive approach to prevention of violent extremism. So what was that turning point made us into? Women activists from various organizations argued that creating policies without comprehending gender lenses will not change the situation. So why did I mention about the turning point? Because for sometimes speaking harsh, eliminating other groups were somewhat tended to be normalized under the name of religion. And for particular group, this cannot be held true any longer. So that is why after that incident, we bring shame to Islam communities in Indonesia. Some women started to respond, right? And Indonesian women, most of whom have been engaged in post-1998 peace building, then step in. They deliberatively contribute to think about and drafting the concepts of preventing violent extremism. So I had read in several conversations pertaining to preventing violent extremism in Indonesia that groups only execute what the foreign influence defined about us. But if we pay attention to the chronological period, the response on the event in Surabaya, it was not correct, because all the groups that involved later on had contributed their perspective, and they also inherently tried to present the more meaningful, constructive, and positive aspect of what Islam should be from their response policy approaches and also from their program-based proposals to the government. In order to prevent more women from becoming actors of violence, the women organization mentioned it is necessary to understand the reasons behind the recruitment of women differently than how the violent extremist groups recruiting men. So that was the point of departure. And then during the 2018 to 2020 was the time where I involved directly into the formulation of Presidential Regulation number 7 into 2021 concerning the National Action Plan for the Prevention and Combating Violent Extremism based on violence that leads to terrorism for the next 5 years. So what was the discussion? What was the atmosphere when we formulated this policy? The BNPT, as one of the policy initiator, asked for consultancies among women's grassroots organizations. For instance, ASEAN Muslim Action Network, the Wahid Foundation, Yayasan Prasasti Perdamaian, several of the State Islamic University in Jakarta, in Surabaya, and also in Yogyakarta, as part of their gaining constructive consultation from the different variety groups in the society in order not to be in a wrong direction or in the wrong path in creating the policy. So what is the National Action Plan of Preventing Violent Extremism? It's an example of a policy product that accommodates Islamic values. For instance, through musyawarah and muwasaat or cooperation, which were practiced by activists in formulating tools to prevent violent extremism. So instead of having it negatively, the process of formulating this policy were also applied meaningful, constructive Islamic values. So organizations were invited, no claim, baseless claim were made. The formulation policy also inviting serious Islamic scholars from different levels, but also, note this, women ulama, communities. So not only male ulama, but also women ulama. Why this aspect is very much important. So because this seminar, like mentioned by our dean this morning, very early, it will picture to what extent Islamic values are in Indonesian governance. So this is one of the example, how the positive Islamic values added into the governance, the creation of policy by the Indonesian government. And also it added into the contribution from the civil society organization. So this policy was born from a joint initiative between BNPT and civil society groups, especially community-based women's organizations. So this is one aspect that is very important. Why then people ask, then some question arise in this sense. Why women organization? Because they could and had experienced the direct impact of the violent extremism. That is why their voices as part of the victims, but also as part of the agency, the empowered parties should be heard, not only recognized, but heard and being part of the policy. This is the significance of why community-based women organizations, consultancies, and voices are included in the policy. And I think, and I also agreed, based on my interviews with other organizations, that this was the second example in the Indonesian policy formulation, where the collaboration between the government and civil society organization were quite intact. Because it needs to be formulated in response to the event and should be there in order to prevent the same thing to occur in the later years, in the future. So in preparing the policy during the period of 2017 to 2020, for instance, participants from women's organization argued that globally, religious motives were the main background for the birth of acts of extremism by jihadist groups, like we heard from Professor Ahmad, the first speaker. A woman leader for organization who participated in the process mentioned, when I interviewed, religious issues in Indonesia are mostly considered as sensitive. So this is the common myth, right? Yet it is effective in generating emotions and support for jihadist movements, especially using online platforms. I think the context was during the pandemic, but then after the pandemic, it still also become a comfortable arena to use the online recruitment. The limited understanding of religious texts often traps a narrow understanding that religion justifies acts of violence in the implementation of religious behavior. So this conversation is resonated with the finding from my current study with my center, Monash Gender Peace and Security Center, and UN Women in 2022 during COVID-19, where appeals to charismatic masculinities are used to attract recruits and legitimize violence, revealing consistency between online and offline channels or sites of radicalization and participation. However, this differs depending on the ideology of the organization and may not be consistent among different militant organizations throughout the region that can expose jihadism, ethno-nationalism, or far-right extremism. I also have provided the link if students or academics or professors in the State Islamic University are interested in reading our research results. So there are, for instance, this picture, the first one is about the National Action Plan, was produced by the Wahid Foundation. And the second picture is one of the fragments that resulted from our study here, cooperated with UN Women. So you can find these two publications online. And this is the picture of our center's publication, the recent, which was launched in April 2021. So how about the role of women's groups in developing the National Action Plan of Prevention Extremism in Indonesia? I must say that I was so proud to be part of the study group, but also to be part of the collective efforts by Indonesian women in developing this together with BNPT. This is one of the governance, how Islam politics is involved in the government in a positive way, because the continuous discussion, continuous dialogue was colored the process of formulating this policy. So Monash Gender, Peace and Security and UN Women Study in 2022 had pictured or identified the level of collective leadership and how gender was incorporated into the National Action Plan for counter-violence-based extremism that leads to terrorism formulation and implementation processes. As we speak, actually, women activists, women groups still join hand in hand with the local government, with the BNPT in several locations in Indonesia where the violent extremism are quite rampant situation and affecting local community, like in West Nusa Tenggara, in I think in West Java, but also in Ambon city, the post-conflict, which is quite also vulnerable to new potential threat from the identity politics. So the Indonesia's National Action Plan of PCVE was born out of shared concerns after the increasing number of terror attacks by women, children, and family units, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, BNPT and Indonesia's civil society organization, particularly women-led organizations, work together to a whole government and whole society approach to formulate prevention instrument through a national action network. So what is this whole government, whole society approach? I will develop in or elaborate during the discussion section, but it's suffice to say that without support from the society, the government cannot do anything unilaterally. So that is why when asking question to Professor Ahmad, I maintain my opinion that the state should apply two branches or two different approaches. First is the traditional security approach, but also under the scrutiny of the what is called supervision function by the legislative, because we know in the democracy we have checks and balances. We should also maintain a very a level of critical perspective from the academician, from the activists, but also supposed to have another approach that is preventative in nature, like this policy, right? That could invite participation of society organizations without having to worry that if they also extend critics or supervise, they could get arrested or they could apply it as the subject of arbitrary arrest. So this is why preventative approach is needed. So what were the expression of roles during the process of policy formulation? So women organization, women-led organization are confident in persuading policymakers, right? They have own campaign. They lobbied government. They also lobbied key persons in the policy-making position, from the Ministry of Law, Politics and Security, the BNPT, presidential, what is KSP, Presidential Staff Office, Secretary Cabinet, and all. So the collective movement by the Indonesian civil society organization led by women, they had their ways in persuasion, in public persuasion, but also in persuading BNPT in order to adopt a more gender-sensitive policy. They also had their own method in campaigning, the importance of having preventative approach in facing the violent extremism in the society, because they knew if not done, this policy is not formulated and only one strand of policy adopted, namely the traditional security approach, then it will create backlash. As I think Professor Ahmad also mentioned, dialogue should be there. You also need to supervise your environment through the education system, family system, also more epistemic community and ecosystem perspective in order not to be recruited by the violent extremist organization. And also the pool of knowledge. They develop knowledge hub. You could visit several websites that created by these women leaders. I will mention later. And also could visit their own publication, for instance, these two pictures. They actively produce their knowledge based on the experiments, not only in terms of the policy, but also their own initiatives in the society that accommodate a positive, somewhat positive Islamic values. They also extend networking. So what is the lessons learned? Because I know that the time is up and I only have several minutes to move on. So what are the lessons learned from the process? When drafting and implementing the PCVE policies, responsive to gender-sensitive approaches, the women groups apply intersectionality perspective. And it must be aimed or reflected in the substantive conversation or dialogue or discussion of the draft, and the minimum meaningful participation must be included during the formulation of policies. Of course, one could ask, well, sometimes policymaking only invite interest groups or they whom first know, but this is what we call expert and it should have credibilities, right? So for instance, the BNPT should consult with the Islamic State University pertaining what is the role of education in preventing extremism on campuses, right? So there is no way that a particular government agency could only do what it likes without consulting experts from the related topic. And the second point is that the multiplication of concrete national action plan implementation initiatives at the local level, which sign on multi-level coordination between national, local agencies, allow for the broadening of ownership. So the sense of ownership should be broadened as a shared agenda according to the violent extremist affected communities. So one thing that is also need to be remembered that because violent extremist activities are not happening in all of the provinces, but it happened in pockets areas. This understanding is important in order to prevent the generalization of policy and the policy implementation. This way could make government and civil society organizations that participated in the policy implementation focus so that could create positive output. So with that in mind, I will finish my presentation. Thank you. Terima kasih. Sukron, matur nuwun, and I will be open for questions and answer session. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Give applause to Miss Irene. Thank you so much, Miss.
Thank you.
Can you hear the claps?
Yes.
Okay, Miss. Look like the student was so excited for your presentation. So before we go into Q&A session, I would like to, Miss, can you wait until the last session because we will open the Q&A session after two speakers more.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Irene, for the amazing. Next, I would like to introduce our third speakers. Okay, our third speaker today is Professor Rommel Banlaoi. Hello, Professor. Are you here?
Yes, I am here. Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Professor. How are you?
Very fine. Yes, greetings from Manila, Philippines.
Okay.
Maraming salamat, Prof.
Maraming salamat.
Thank
Mabuhay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Professor, before you deliver your presentation, I would like to introduce you to all of the students here and all of the audience. So Professor Rommel C. Banlaoi is the chairman of the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research, while serving as the president of the Philippine Society for the Intelligence and Security Studies, and the convener of the Network for the Prevention of Violent Security Extremism in the Philippines. He also served as the chairman of the Council for ASEAN Terrorism Research, organized by the Institute for Defense Analysis, based in Washington, D.C., and non-residence fellow at the Center for Global Counterterrorism Cooperation, based in New York City. Wow. He is the author of numerous books, journal articles, and book chapters on terrorism issues in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. He is the author of the book War on Terrorism in Southeast Asia, published by Rex Bookstore International in 2004, and Counterterrorism Measures in Southeast Asia. He's also worked a chapter in Perspective on Terrorism in the Philippine Context, published by the University of the Philippines Law Center in 2019. Professor Banlaoi was a fellow of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, based on Hawaii. He used to be a professor for political science and international relations at the University of the Philippines Los Baños and University Research Associate at the University of Philippines Tillman. Well, give applause to our third speaker today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. What I would like to discuss today is the role of political Islam in the Philippines and in the context of persistent threats of terrorism in the Philippines. So let me express first my gratitude to all organizers for this kind invitation. This event is very timely in the context of the 21st anniversary of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States, as well as the 5th anniversary of the liberation of Marawi from the siege of terrorist fighters linked with Islamic State, and even the release of Umar Patek from Indonesian prison, which closely coincides with the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the Bali bombing. It is also significant in the light of the just concluded visit to Indonesia of our newly elected Philippine President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. His visit to Indonesia demonstrated how Filipinos value our relationship with our closest neighbor in Southeast Asia. So good morning to all. Assalamualaikum. Peace to be with you all. What I intend to do in at least 15 minutes is to describe the impact of political Islam on Philippine government and society by grappling with this concept and by describing the persistent threats of terrorism in a nation still suffering from the perennial Muslim rebellion despite existing peace-building efforts. It is imperative to discuss first the meaning of political Islam, as it is a highly contested concept. So political Islam is considered to be a modern concept that seeks to use religion to shape the political system. But for me, political Islam is a conceptual framework that uses Islamic religious precepts as justifications for radical, even conservative, and even moderate or revolutionary political actions. It is often associated with Islamic fundamentalist and revivalist thoughts of Sayyid Qutb, Maulana Maududi, and Ayatollah Khomeini, among others, though scholarly discussions on political Islam transcend those thinkers I mentioned. Nonetheless, political Islam is akin to Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic conservatism, Islamic revivalism, and Islamic radicalism in the existing academic literature. Some even situate political Islam under the ideological rubric of Wahhabism, Salafism, Jihadism, and other isms discussing the role of Islam in politics. There's also a strand of political Islam articulating the voice of moderation and even championing the role of gender and ecology in Islamic government and society. In the intelligence community, political Islam is linked with the extremist ideas and violent actions of Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and other terrorist groups organized by violent Muslim militants. Hence, political Islam is arguably tied with violent extremism that encourages adherents to commit acts of terrorism. In some scholarly discourses, political Islam is regarded as the crux of the modern day ideology of Islamism that is largely anti-Western, anti-secular, and anti-status quo, even leading to many violent activities. In other academic studies, Islamism is viewed to be an alternative ideology of both peaceful dissent and also violent resistance of Muslim people. In the Philippines, political Islam provides the narrative of resistance as it is connected with the ideologies and activities of Filipino Muslim resistant armed groups like the Moro National Liberation Front, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and even terrorist groups like the Abu Sayyaf Group, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, as well as remnants of the Maute Group, Ansar Khalifa Philippines, and other pro-IS elements responsible for the Marawi siege of 2017 and other violent activities in the Philippines before and even after that violent incident. Okay, and Marawi siege, as you all know, was the most devastating violent incident in Philippine history. Interestingly, political Islam is also being used by some traditional and even new Filipino Muslim politicians to justify their platforms for change during Philippine elections. I even observed that members of the MILF-led Bangsamoro Transition Authorities are articulating various interpretations of political Islam as models of governance as they assert the right to self-determination, which I hope they are enjoying right now as a result of two peace agreements. First with the MNLF in 1997 and with the MILF in 2014. Indeed, there are many facets of political Islam. There are various notions and understanding of political Islam. There is no doubt that it is an ambiguous concept that is found at the complex nexus of society, state, religion, and nation. It is a nebulous idea that requires deeper thinking in order to provide us a better understanding of our current situation. But let me discuss how the concept of political Islam resonates in the Philippines. Today, around 6% of the total Philippine population of 120 million are Muslims, who, to emphasize, are largely secular rather than religious. The majority of the Muslims in the Philippines, particularly those in the marginalized areas, do not have a clear understanding of political Islam and its many variants, particularly Islamism. Only few Muslim intellectuals and some religious leaders have a grasp of political Islam and its impact on government and society. In fact, the cultural identity of Muslims in the Philippines is a complex blend of Islam and primarily pre-Islamic indigenous practices. Thus, the National Commission on the Culture and the Arts of the Philippines regards Muslims as one of the cultural communities or cultural minorities in the country with 13 ethno-linguistic tribes rather than a homogeneous religious construct. Only few individuals associated with resistant and violent groups profess political Islam and regard Islam as a political and religious identity. Though Muslims in the Philippines belong to the so-called minority population, their impact on Philippine government and society is significant to the majority of the Filipinos because of the locations that they call as their ancestral domain. The vast majority of Muslims in the Philippines are found in highly resource-rich but conflict-affected area of Mindanao. And Mindanao is the country's pioneer frontier, where 40% of the Philippines' food requirements and 30% of the country's national food trade are found. Thus, Mindanao is essential to the Philippines' food security. Small but currently growing Muslim communities are also established in the islands of Luzon and Visayas. But the dominant religion in the Philippines continues to be Catholicism. But Islam came to the Philippines 2 centuries earlier. The coming of Islam to the Philippines was a function of the general expansion of Islam in Malaysia. With Islam becoming a cherished faith in Malaysia, it expanded to the neighboring Philippines to the island of Sulu, where Islam obtained its original foothold. An Arab trader preacher known as Tuan Masaika was believed to have founded the first Muslim community in the Sulu in the 14th century, leading to the eventual establishment of the Sulu Sultanate in 1405 and Maguindanao Sultanate in 1520. These two sultanates demonstrated that Islam played a pivotal role in establishing strong political organizations in the pre-colonial Philippine society. These sultanates demonstrated the great impact of Islam on the formation of pre-colonial Philippine government and society. But in 1521, Spain started to colonize the Philippines and propagated Christianity with its own model of government and society imposed on the inhabitants. The rest is a long history of Spanish colonial rule of the Philippines that lasted 333 years. But the Muslims of Mindanao, called Moros, were not totally controlled by the Spanish authorities during the colonial rule until Spain sold the Philippines to the United States through the Treaty of Paris in 1898. When the U.S. granted the Philippine independence in July 1946, there were already the resurgence of Islam and the rise of nationalism in the Muslim world. This trend greatly influenced the politicization of Islam in the Philippines, the deepening of the Moro Islamic consciousness, and even the strengthening of Moro nationalist sentiment, advocating for a Moro model of government and society through armed struggle, locally known by the Moros as Parang Sabil, or dying for the cause of Allah. In 1951, for example, some Muslims in the Philippines waged the Kamlong Armed Uprising, which lasted until 1955. The Kamlong Uprising prompted the Philippine government to implement programs that aimed to promote the integration of Muslims in the mainstream Philippine government and society dominated by Christians. So as part of its political integration programs, the Philippine government organized in 1957 the Commission on National Integration, which provided scholarships in the National Capital Region to young Muslims. The main intention of the program was to encourage the Moros to accept the authority of the government in Manila. However, some were drawn into opposition politics. As a result, the Moro communities were divided into two major groups in the Philippines: the integrationist or assimilationist or integrationist group involved in mainstream political activities, and the secessionist, separatist, or liberationist group engaged in armed activities. The first group accepted Philippine sovereignty, while the other group believes that Mindanao belongs to a separate Islamic state that deserves full independence. Thus, those who continue to defy the authority of the Christian-dominated Philippine government assert that their identity is separate from Filipinos, as they are Moros and they refuse to regard themselves as Filipinos. By the 1960s, southern Philippines had been virtually taken over by a Christian majority, except areas like Lanao del Sur, Cotabato areas, Basilan, and Sulu, now forming the Bangsamoro region in the Philippines. Thus, the Moro had become a minority in many parts of their traditional homeland, with many losing their land to the immigrant settlers through dubious legal transactions or outright confiscations. The massive influx of Christian Filipinos to Mindanao has terribly angered the Moros. So, there was the spark that strongly lit Muslim rebellion, and that was the Jabida Massacre in March 1968. Otherwise known as the Corregidor Massacre, it took place in the Corregidor Island of the Philippines, involving Moro armed recruits being trained for Operation Merdeka, a code name for clandestine destabilization plan of the armed forces of the Philippines, aiming to infiltrate Sabah as part of the strategy of the Philippine government to strengthen its territorial claim. Allegedly, their trainers summarily executed 28 and 64 Moro recruits undergoing military training. This incident prompted Governor Udtong Matalam of Cotabato to form the Mindanao Independence Movement, declaring the establishment of an Islamic state in Mindanao. However, Matalam abandoned his separatist stand when the Philippine government convinced him to abandon his cause. Other Muslim leaders who resented the continuing oppression of the Moros continued their armed struggle for self-determination, leading to the establishment of an underground Muslim resistance groups like the Moro National Liberation Front, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and the Abu Sayyaf group, among others. With the global and regional trends in Islamic resurgence in the 1990s, particularly with the end of the Cold War, local conflict between Christians and Muslims in the Philippines further acquired an international dimension, particularly in the aftermath of 9/11 terrorist attacks. Since 9/11, political Islam in the Philippines has been inaccurately associated with separatism and terrorism. 2 decades after 9/11, terrorist threats have persisted in the Philippines even during the COVID-19 pandemic. The face of terrorism in the Philippines during the pandemic has become more lethal, dangerous, and devastating with the rise of suicide terrorism, a tactic strongly encouraged by the Islamic State. With 5 incidents recorded since the Marawi liberation in 2017, suicide terrorism has become the most favored act of terrorism in the Philippines by pro-IS elements. Though many remain engaged in roadside bombings, harassments, and ambuscades, suicide terrorism has become the most violent expression of political Islam in the Philippines. Recent developments in Afghanistan with the takeover of the Taliban after the US military withdrawal can provide the fertile ground for terrorism in the Philippines to grow and persist. While the Taliban government poses no threat anymore to the Philippines because of its preoccupation to domestically govern rather than to spread global terror, there are terrorist groups in Afghanistan posing clear and present danger to Philippine national security. And one terrorist group that can seriously endanger Philippine security and even the security of Southeast Asia is the Islamic State Khorasan, the main conduit of the Islamic State Central, in order to fund the 2017 Marawi siege and even the 2019 Hulo Cathedral bombing perpetuated by Indonesian couple and other terrorist activities in the Philippines like bomb training, combat training, and preaching of violent extremism. The Islamic State Khorasan used primarily their Malaysian and Indonesian operatives to fund these terror acts through their stealth networks in Afghanistan and Pakistan. If not prevented, the Islamic State Khorasan can fund and support acts of terror in the Philippines because of its enormous intention to do so. The terror network established by the Islamic State Khorasan to fund the Marawi siege and Hulo Cathedral bombing is still in place, with their surviving sleeper cells still around waiting for mobilization. Though strict quarantine measures against the pandemic may have slowed down their terrorist activities in the Philippines, acts of terrorism continue to disturb the peace as demonstrated by recent suicide bombing attacks I mentioned earlier. Thus, terrorist threats have not actually disappeared despite some notable achievements in counter-terrorism 20 years after 9/11 and almost 5 years after the Marawi liberation. Interestingly, many followers and supporters of the Abu Sayyaf group have surrendered to Philippine authorities in order to walk away from terrorism and leave the use of violence. Some members of the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters have also followed suit. Furthermore, key leaders of the MNLF and MILF are now sitting as officials in the Bangsamoro Transition Authority under a parliamentary system that aims to uphold Islam in a peaceful democratic government and society. The Philippine government, on the other hand, is now implementing the National Action Plan to Prevent and Counter Violent Extremism formulated in 2019 and the Anti-Terrorism Law passed in 2020. These new developments can alter the landscape of political Islam in the Philippines and its impact on Philippine government and society. I see the emergence of an evolving narrative of political Islam that can pose new security challenges to existing Philippine government and society. I hope we can discuss further these issues during the open forum as I have a very limited time to speak at the moment. So that's all for now. So thank you very much for your attention. Have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Professor Banlaoi. That was awesome presentation and speech. Okay, I would like to let the students for your notes, right? I reminder you guys to pay attention to all the speakers. And thank you, Mr. Banlaoi. We have one more speaker before we go into the Q&A session. So I hope you can wait till the end of the session, okay? Okay, Mr. Banlaoi, we move to the fourth speaker. Miss Prihandari, can you hear me? Are you here?
Yes.
Okay. How are you, Miss?
I'm fine, very good, very excellent. How are you?
Me too. Oh my God, so feeling great today. Okay. Before we let Miss Prihandari to deliver her presentation, I would like to introduce herself first. Anak Agung Istri Prihandari Satvikadewi is a lecturer of University of 17 Agustus 1945 Untak Surabaya. She is a journal coordinator of Association of Higher Education Institution and Communication and a volunteer and coordinator for Children Working Group of Coordinating Agency for Social Welfare Activities. So, Miss, what the subtopic you want to deliver today?
Yes, I think my topic is a slightly different with the previous speakers. I would like to highlight about jilbab. It's kind of a very popular issue in Indonesia from until today. I think it's a never-ending issue. We talk about jilbab and its controversy.
So I see the title from your presentation, the journey of a fail from post-information to Indonesia today. Okay, it looks so, wow. Okay, Miss, the time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to say hello to Honorable the Dean of the Dakwah and Communication Faculty, UIN Kalijaga, UIN Sunan Kalijaga, and fellow speakers, Ibu Irine and Professor Rommel, and also my fellow lecturers and researchers and also students. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to highlight one of the that I mentioned before, one of the most popular issue in Indonesia and still hot topic in our society, that is jilbab. For some times, this has been a very sensitive issue because the jilbab, that actually a piece of clothes, can potentially divide our society and create some groups and exclusive groups and even polarize the society into the what's so-called extreme and non-extreme group. The moderators mentioned before, my name, Ana Agung Istri Prihandari. I'm half Balinese and I converted to Islam. I converted to Islam when I was in young age, but then I experienced some unique things about jilbab. I'm wearing jilbab since I was probably in my 30s, and since then, I see that jilbab is not a simple thing. It has very many aspects to discuss about. One thing about jilbab is one group will easily label the other group with some not very nice name, whether it's like a intolerant. People will easily give name to some group intolerant, to those who ask for other group or other girls or women who doesn't wear headscarf, and they ask to put it on their head so that they can be saved from sin, so they can not go to hell and go instead to paradise. It is a very common conversation. We can hear in some conversation in our peer group, sekedar mengingatkan, kalau boleh kalau boleh tolong dipakai jilbabnya, something like that. So we can see that jilbab can easily divide our society into groups. Probably you ever heard the term of jilbab. Jilbab is to name girls or women who already wear the jilbab, but at the same time they are wearing a very tight clothes that expose their body, and as if they are not wearing anything, and they were easily subjected as not Shari, not really understand about Islam, something like that. On the other hand, there are groups emerged among the society that name themselves with some Islamic terminologies, like group of jilbab Shari, that is referred to long clothes that cover almost of their body, and they tend to exclusive themselves from other groups. in terms of taking special treatment of how to do their religious interest. Those situation for me as late boomers, I was born in 1974, so it somehow is a new thing for me because back then in early 80s, it's rare to find women or girls with jilbab. You know, I remember when I was in elementary school, there is only one woman in my neighborhood who wear jilbab, and it was the only Ibu Haji in, in my surroundings. And but now, as we can see, jilbab is like our native fashion, even in Bali. Uh, the latest time I went to Bali, where it used to be a traditional woman not cover their upper body with any clothes, it's now very different. Even in the beach, we can see tourists wearing jilbab all over the beach, and even our minister encouraged to develop Sharia tourism to accommodate Muslim tourists, including women and girls who wear jilbab as their daily fashion, so they can safely and freely go to any places all over Indonesia as a tourist and being Shari, it's a halal tourism and something like that. Now, please, next slide. Prior to Reformation, back in 1998, actually we can see women wearing head cover, but not jilbab. It's like a veil, but not cover their head totally. It is the photo from old order era before new order, and they usually jilbab usually wear by ibu nyai from pesantren and not everyday wear as everyday fashion. And next slide, please. Before Reformation in 1978, when Suharto rules under new order rules under Suharto administration, jilbab was prohibited in 1978. I remember when I was in junior high school, my friend has to take off their jilbab once they arrive at school and wear it again when school dismissed and they go home wearing it. But it's very rare. It's very little of students wearing jilbab. In 1982, the Directorate General of Primary, Secondary, and Upper Education gave the decree number 52, which prohibits school uniforms from wearing headscarf, and it's very hard for some students who wants to wear jilbab, so they have to adapt with the regulation. But in 1991, situation was changing when Suharto entered the last decade of his administration. Suharto needs Islamic group support tremendously to keep his power, of course. So he accommodated the demand of Muslim on this issue, and jilbab is allowed for elementary, junior, and senior students. It was determined as an alternative school uniform for Muslim women. And here we can see that Indonesian Muslim women are not freely to choose, I guess, to wear what they like to wear back today. But the question is, are they free to choose today? We know that now there are great numbers of women wearing jilbab, but it is represent that are they free to choose today. Let's see what happened between 1998 and now. As the Reformation began, there are euphoria among every level and every group of society. And soon after that, jilbab entered the entertainment industries and become an inclusive part of pop culture. We know from the movies and soap operas, jilbab become new trend, and jilbab is no longer a piece of headscarf anymore, which represent only obedience to the religion, but it also become part of lifestyle. And even the industrial minister targeted the revenue to get revenue, bigger revenue from the Muslim fashion industries, because Muslim fashion industries contribute almost 50% to national income from creative industry sector. And the minister even mentioned that Indonesia should be the center of Muslim of Sharia fashion, halal fashion, or the term is intertwined from Shari and halal fashion. But the real problem is actually about jilbab is, do the government really take account to this issue, or is it only for short-term political interest? That is still a question today, because as we can see, next slide, please. Yes, because as we can see in the grassroots levels, the real problem is the division of society, the forcing of wearing jilbab. Next slide, please. In the elementary, junior, and senior high school is just keep on going. Even now, not only students, but regular women who just sit in public areas, malls, or city garden are subjected to wear jilbab by anonymous person on behalf of religious reason. We know after Reformation in 2001 in Ramayu and the Tasik Malaya in West Java, and some places in Indonesia, demand for wearing jilbab not prohibited anymore, and we can see on the contrary that who wearing jilbab even forced anyone who are not to wear as they wear. So what I want to say here is we need to have a broader discourse about jilbab so we can position it fairly and justly. And as decentralization become the heart of how the administration operates today, I think we have the right to encourage local government to keep up with this issue, not to regulate how Muslim women should wear. Instead, they have to provide a set of that accommodate and empower Muslim women. And we can prevent our girls and women from being used or abused by political power. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Give applause to Miss Prihandari. Okay, Miss Prihandari is our last speakers. So I would like to open the Q&A session for the students. There is any question for all of our speakers? It's okay, nggak apa-apa in bahasa, nanti bisa ditranslate ke Inggris. Mungkin teman-teman ada yang mau nanya. Ayo loh. Oke. Okay.
Allow me to introduce my name. My name is Reja Farroji Batubara. I am from South Sumatra, Medan. As we are youth and also women, what kind of improvement we can do as a student in consideration about radicalism that you said now increase the number of terror attacks by women and children? Thank you.
Oh, okay. The question is for Miss Irine. Miss Irine, can you hear the question?
Yes. So what was the question again? Is how as student or academics respond to the increasing roles of women and children in radical. So as I mentioned earlier, as part of the academics, first as part of academics, but as academics also part of the family and as part of the wider society, we needed to raise our consciousness. For instance, if you are raised in an Islamic-based community, you need also position yourself as part of the bigger society, meaning perhaps your neighbor is not from Islam, right? Maybe your neighbor is Christian or Hindus or Catholic. So the awareness that we are part of the bigger nation is needed to be instilled in our mind. Therefore, you can develop more positive attitude towards differences, understanding that it is not only ourselves as part of the Islam Ummah, as part of the Indonesian society, that can support your positive attitude toward differences, not only belief, but differences in the way of life. Because as far as I remember, one credo that extremists or jihadists take is that because, for instance, they see Indonesia as so good. They see the democratic government is so good that needed to be eliminated. That is completely a wrong idea. And as good Muslim, for instance, in my family, I am raised that harmful for others, meaning even to think about it is not Islamic. So you need to interpret and you need to put new meaning or renew the meaning about what is Islamic attitude. So if you choose the wrong way, joining radical groups, that is definitely not Islamic. That is why organizations like women organization campaign about tolerant or Islam Ramah. So the Rahmatul Alamin dimension of Islam as religious is being put upon in the society, in the conversation among the society, as part of our daily conversation. So you won't call bad name to other groups outside Islam, for instance. You won't condescend the political candidates in our regular election as not legitimate to lead the state, the Indonesian state, for instance. Why? Because our foundation is not based on Islamic state, but we need to realize that we are a pluralistic nation, composed of heterogeneous belief as part of the citizens. So the combination of the secular perspective and where religion is also part of the conversation among the secular nation is also a good point of departure in order to prevent us to act uncivilized against others. I think that is the first point of departure. And the second point is how we develop this attitude. No other than, for instance, from the conversation among in the curriculum, education curriculum. I think our colleague from Surabaya, Ibu, oh my God, I forgot the name. Ibu Prihandari also had stated some examples about the process of jilbab, hijab, head cover in Indonesian context. Maybe different than in the Philippines, different in the Malaysia as well. We had this process because really, if we look upon the history of Indonesian clothing, we had 100,000 of traditional legacies. That's the color how Indonesian shape the fashion today. So there is no way the homogenization, if it is forced, it will definitely create backlash, right? Like forcing way of life, it is not good. But I also realized the tendency of liberal politics accommodating different strands or isms. Like, for example, if I follow Dr. Rommel's example in the Bangsamoro situation, in Aceh we have Sharia Islam as part of the compensation, post-conflict compensation by the Indonesian government toward the Free Aceh movement that take up the Islam as part of the local identity. Yet there is several of practices that could be assumed as, condescending human rights or women's rights. And it should be still become part of the conversation as the modern nation like Indonesia. Also, situation in West Sumatra province, like mentioned by our colleague here, Prihandari, in the conversation. So I think I will stop there because I believe this could be, instigating further discussion. Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator Andina.
Miss Irene. Okay, next we have one more question from the student.
Hello, Miss. My name is Firda. I want to ask a question. So the question is, what an effective way to do presentation by the topic that Miss Irene talked to for a young generation like us? Thank you.
Can you repeat? Okay. Your name and for who you address to the questions.
Hello, Miss. My name is Firda. I want to ask a question. So the question is, what an effective way do to presentation by the topic that Miss Irene talked to for a young generation like us? Thank you.
Thank you. Also, this question for Miss Irene, right? Okay, Miss Irene, there's another question for you again.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, okay. So young generation. I will let you have the link of our national action plan on preventing of violent extremism, which also still developed in the Philippines, and I think it's already passed the legislative, right, Professor? So in the design, BNPT and civil society organization also approach the youth, because youth are also vulnerable to be recruited by the jihadist movement, right? The ages between 15 or what they call as Jundi are, what is it called? Very important ages because susceptible to ideologies and also militancy they love to take from the youth. The preventing method is part of the education curriculum, but also I think the government in this case, I think we demanded, civil society organization demanded that the government provide more rooms for youth to have more positive attitude or activities. So for instance, extracurricular activities, more sport facilities, more, what is it called, youth centers should be developed. Because if we remember, there is this theory, civil society engagement in terms of mediation of conflict. But also the same perspective could be applied to prevent them from being recruited by the narrative from the jihadist militant groups. More positive, Dr. Ahmad asked in the morning, which I actually have disagreed. What is to counter? Precisely the negative narratives need to have counter, but not always in forms of statement, but through activities, the organic engagement, direct engagement in the community. But also I think the government needs to take the lead to exemplify, positive leadership. I think one of the weapon manipulated or what is it called, being taken advantage of from the militant group is the level of corruption, right, in the system. And they also always come to the aspect of grievances. So part of the grievances against the government. So how the government need to put an end to this widening gap in the community. I think that is also one aspect that youth can fulfill. For instance, they need to scrutinize, for instance, online narratives. So some organization in the university, for instance, I will take up Paramadina University, try to develop a program called digital literacy among youth, with participants coming from Rohis organization, so that they can be aware of what sort of negative narratives explored by the jihadist groups online. I think that is one way to prevent it, other than to raise always healthy consciousness among youth. I hope this helps. Thank you very much.
Thank you for Miss Irene for the amazing answer. Okay, we move to the question that addressed to Mr. Rommel. There's from Anas. Shalom, my name is Anas from Indonesia. I want to ask to Mr. Rommel whether Muslim politicals in the Philippines are any fierce as Muslim politicals in Indonesia.
I really don't know what do you mean by fierce, but we know that Muslims in the Philippines are known in the region for being brave, especially the Tausug people. You know, they are so-called the Spartan of Mindanao. They are really good in battle. They even assisted the Sulu of Brunei during their period of help to defend the Sultan, that led to the offering of Sabat to the Sultan of Sulu. But I don't know how fierce is the Muslim Filipinos compared with Muslims in Indonesia. But I know that Indonesian in my area, in the area of counterterrorism, I know that the Indonesian foreign terrorist fighters are in fact motivating Filipino Muslim terrorist fighters to be braver in their violent activities in the Philippines. And Indonesian terrorist fighters also provide ideological basis for the violent activities of predominantly secular Muslim Filipinos. So that's my observation. And also some militant Muslims in Malaysia also motivate our Muslims in Mindanao to be fiercer and to embrace the wrong ideology of violent extremism. But also, we owe it to some Indonesian and Malaysian religious leaders in propagating the idea of non-violence, because Islam is a religion of peace, and they provide us a religious basis for the promotion of peace in conflict-affected areas in Mindanao. Always remember that were it not for the influence of Malaysian and Indonesian people, Muslims in the Philippines will not have flourished. So we owe it to our neighbors for the flourishing of Islam. So we, again, in the area of countering violent extremism and in the area of countering violent extremism, we always seek the help of our Muslim brothers and sisters in Indonesia and Malaysia to help us, because we belong to the same area, we share the same problem. So it's very important that we continue to help each other in promoting peace in our region. And that is why I'm here engaging with you, engaging with my Malaysian and Indonesian friends, in order to continue this sharing of ideas, as we have the same purpose of countering violent extremism and preventing terrorism, and propagating the culture of peace and non-violence in our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rommel. Okay, there is one question more addressed to you, Mr. Hi, Professor Rommel. Is there any groups in Philippines or Malaysia who have contact with ISQ right now? If yes, who are they and what are the activities?
Well, I can only say yes, that Islamic State Khorasan has existing networks with their contacts in Malaysia, Philippines, and even Indonesia. They have their contacts, but I'm not free to discuss the details. But we are monitoring some individuals who continue to have communications with Islamic State Khorasan. They communicate through social media, but with the loosening of quarantine measures in Indonesia, Malaysia, particularly in the Philippines, we are afraid that it might facilitate again their face-to-face engagement. So that is one of my interests right now, is the prevention of foreign terrorist fighters to reach the Philippines again and mount violent attacks, because as a result of the 2017 Marawi siege, I observed that the Marawi siege of 2017 would not have been carried out without the support of the Islamic State, especially those coming from Malaysia and Indonesia. So we want to prevent that kind of incident to happen again. So I'm not free to discuss specific information in this public forum, but what I can say is that Indonesia and the Philippines have agreed to cooperate in counterterrorism as a result of our president's recent visit to Indonesia. Now our president is in Singapore to again promote counterterrorism cooperation, because we need a regional response to prevent terrorist fighters to mount violent incidents again anywhere in Southeast Asia, especially so in conflict-affected areas of the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Thank
Give
you.
applause. Oh my God, it sounds so amazing, right? Like 3 countries will be cooperate together for decreasing the terrorism, right? Okay, it sounds so amazing for the 3 countries. Okay, next we have another question, but it addressed to Miss Prihandari from Anas. Assalamualaikum, my name is Anas from UIN. I want to ask Miss Prihandari, why do Muslims really want to wear headscarves or hijab or veil and say that their identity, even though nuns also wear the hijab or the veil?
Why a woman wants to wear hijab? I don't know actually why, but in my personal experience, it's some kind of personal reason that we have a urge to wear hijab, and it's just not it's very different from one and another. But if we see the trend of wearing hijab, it's something like we call we need to be admitted. We need to be part or belong to some groups. So that is also one of the reasons that women or girls wearing hijab. But in addition, for how the terrorism began, I have a little experience with my my children. They go to Islamic school, and one of their friend is member of family that Ibu Irene mentioned before, is a suicide bombing doer, and they do this bombing in Surabaya, and they tend to wearing hijab as their identity, and they withdraw from their friends, and they become very exclusive, and they wear a different color of hijab, different color of jilbab syar'i. So they tend to tell the world that they were different, and that's for the extreme side. But for the regular basis, women or girls wearing hijab is, I think it's a very personal reason. That's my answer.
Thank you to Miss Prihandari. Okay, there is Miss Irene want to respond to Dr. Rommel. Okay, Miss Irene.
Oh, I think. Oh, thank you. I just saw Senator Fred Lubang joined it. But thank you, Professor Rommel. I think it's really great to follow your presentation. Actually, I didn't want to ask. I just wanted to comment that it's true. The character of the transnational criminal organized organization like ISK after the Taliban resurrected in Afghanistan, it has affiliates in Indonesia, it has affiliates in or sympathizers in Malaysia and Philippines. I think just a consequence of the development of this ideological warfare from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, as we also recognize in, I think, between 2014 when they declared, right, in the Philippines, and it's resonated directly in Indonesia. And then since then we witnessed the increasing recruitment of civilians into this organized transnational crime organization. I always maintain the level of naming them as it is, transnational criminal organization, without normalizing the use of Islamic terminologies, right? Like jihadism, Amalia. If we had time, like what I did to my studies, I read 100 pages of court documents. It is quite obvious that they manipulated all the substantive terminology using in Islamic teaching to lure youth, women, children into their organization and strategies. And I think despite the pandemic, they still maintain this technology, meanwhile using so many social media platforms like Instagram, Telegram, and also Facebook, definitely. And state censor toward the media like this still can be manipulated by them because of the also financial flow, the transnational financial flow. So I think it's just correct that states in Southeast Asia region develop cooperation. And I think there are several examples to it, the IDMM, and also provided by the latest meeting in Bali and also in the Philippines several times in order to counter the sporadic movement in Southeast Asia. So I think what Professor Rommel mentioned about the political Islam, despite the different natures of democracy, but I think some similarities. For instance, if they spread hatred, we spread more educative, positive as counter narrative, like this intra-nation dialogue, mitigating by the academic communities. I think this is still important because all who involved in this activity, I think will not condone extremism in terms of religious practice in respected countries. I think that's all my comment. And I think this is important for our young participants of this event to hear, because still Islamic State universities are the boardroom for future intellectuals and maybe future politicians as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Irene, to the message for the young students here. I hope they can be implemented all the things that they can hear here. Okay, now we have another question from the student from Universitas 17 Agustus Surabaya. Okay. Give applause to him. Okay.
Check. Hello guys, my name Amin Wahyudi. I'm from Untak Surabaya. I have question for Prof. Rommel. Hi, Prof.
Hello.
How's the comparison between Philippine terrorists from Muslim and from communists? What the difference between them, especially in their characteristic? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Can I answer now?
Okay, sure. Time is yours, Prof.
Yes, okay. Let's emphasize first the difference Philippine terrorists in the Philippines are classified into two: the terrorists espousing violent extremism from the Muslim front, and terrorists espousing violence from the communist front. The difference between the two is that the 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 well, in Mindanao, there are various armed groups. Some armed groups are secular armed groups advocating for Moro nationalism. Okay, and Islam is just secondary. It's just a coincidence that they are Muslims, but they are advocating for Moro nationalism. There are Moros, and Moros are defined as people composed of both Muslims, Christians, and the indigenous people. So that's their concept of the Moro. There's another group, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, wants to pursue the right for self-determination of the Bangsamoro people using the precepts of Islam as a religion. That's why it's called Islamic. The Moro National Liberation Front is more secular, more nationalistic. Okay, more nationalistic. But the most extreme group in Mindanao is the Abu Sayyaf group, because they want to align their ideology with either with the Islamic State or with the Al-Qaeda. So that's the nature of Muslim Filipino resistant groups in Mindanao. And then we have the Philippine Communism, the New People's Army. They are not religious group, they are ideological group, predominantly Maoist. They are embracing the ideology of Maoism, okay, especially the Marxist-Leninist brand of Maoism. However, since majority of the New People's Army are located in the eastern part of Mindanao, they also recruit Moro fighters in their ranks. Within the New People's Army, there is a Moro armed group called Moro Army Community. They are not part of the MNLF, they are not part of the MILF, they are not part of the Abu Sayyaf group, but they consider themselves as part of the New People's Army and part of the whole network of the Communist Party of the Philippines National Democratic Front. So they sometimes cooperate with each other. They have tactical alliance. You will be surprised. Even the New People's Army open up tactical alliances with the pro-ISIS elements, you know, just to disturb the peace and multiply their forces against the Philippine government. So that's how complicated the issue of armed violence in Mindanao, because we are both facing the problem of violence from the Moro front and from the communist front. Now, the Philippine government has the intention right now to end the communist armed conflict. Okay, to end the communist armed conflict, and at the same time also to end the overall armed conflict in Mindanao by implementing what Irene already mentioned earlier, in Indonesia, the National Action Plan to Prevent and Counter Violent Extremism. The National Action Plan to Prevent and Counter Violent Extremism is not only targeted against armed Muslim Filipinos, it is targeted against all Filipinos using extreme ideology to promote violence. And we passed the Anti-Terrorism Law of 2020. The Anti-Terrorism Law of 2020 is not targeted against Muslims in Mindanao. It is targeted against all people, whether Muslims, Christians, or indigenous people, okay, using terrorism to make a difference. So it's not targeted against religion. It is a law that aims to account individuals and organizations committing, supporting, financing, and promoting ideologies for people to commit acts of terrorism. So that's the current situation in the Philippines right now, and I hope I made it clear in my brief remarks. Thank you.
Rommel. Okay, give applause for Professor Rommel. Okay, but before we go to the next question, there is response again from Anas. Oh, by the way, Anas is one of the TFEBL student in Universitas Islam Negeri Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. He is one of the different ability student, and now he want to ask again to Miss Irene. In my opinion, I don't agree with the number of women's representation in parliament, because in my opinion, it's not how many women in parliament, but there are good talks from women in parliament. What do you think?
All right. Thank you very much for Anna's question. In terms of liberal democratic perspective, the assumption was that to give affirmative policy, meaning position in the parliament, one of the articulation of liberal democracy is representativeness. In Indonesian democratic parliamentarian democracy, the number of women in parliament is also important because that would decide the voices of the Indonesian women belong to the political parties, meaning that the political party also need to accommodate 30% of women voices in terms of the party structure. But also not only in the parliament, actually in the executive, the 30% of women should be in the executive as well. In Indonesia, aside of, I think, Philippines and Malaysia, have a proportional number of women in the politics. Before this tradition in the liberal political democracy, in Indonesia, also traditionally, women had been part of the public position. For instance, in Aceh, pre the conservation modern state tradition, there were times when 3 women sultanates become the leader in Aceh's kingdom. Also, Indonesian history known the leadership of women Laksamana, I think, in Aceh, Laksamana Malahayati, but also in the Ambon tradition of the armed of the traditional arm before the modern state. So what I wanted to mention is that when the democratic state in its tradition of liberal democracy become part of the Indonesian nation state, the voices of women somewhat sidelined in the parliament, which is irony because in the daily narrative, Indonesian women have become part of the politics. So the affirmative policy is part and parcel of the Indonesian democratic tradition. However, I agree, it is not about the numbers. There is a particular reading, I can let you know which one, written by the Indonesian women academics that highlights the importance of the affirmative policy, but also the importance of improving the democratic system in order to complement the numbers of the numerical aspect in the affirmative policy so that they come hand in hand. So the affirmative policy cannot go by itself or cannot go stand alone, but also need to be implemented by the improvement of the political system. That is, I think, my answer. I hope that helps. Thank you very much.
Miss Irene for the question. Okay, we have our last question from the student. Okay, please. Your name and the question is delivered to.
Check. Okay, the first, my name is Makbul Trisatya. I'm from Makassar. And then it is question for Bu Fika. Hijab now mostly become trend and sometimes it is not properly as is ordered in the religion. What do you think about it? It is still have the important Islamic value as it should. Once again, hijab now mostly become trend and sometimes it is not properly as is ordered in the religion. What do you think about it? It is still have the important Islamic value at this show.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Prihandari.
Thank you. About the trends and how it is fulfill the religious order. I think it's very tricky question because we know we accept religion differently and we perceive what is right and wrong differently as well. I think the most important thing to notice is in our society, if it is if it turn the society into divisions, we have to be aware because earlier I read the question, mengapa umat Islam di Indonesia, why the Islamic people, why Muslim Indonesian Muslim is very difficult to be united. I think the homogenization I think it's the challenging, the most challenging part of the unification or the how we can live side by side peacefully. First of all, we need to make very clear about how we perceive the jilbab itself personally, so we are not judged what other people take jilbab for themselves, for them. I think that's the important thing. So we have to give space and our acceptance to others that one value that we thought it's a very that the most right probably will not be the same, perceived the same by the others. That's I think what we should do to accept others' value in accepting jilbab as part of fashion or part of our identity. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much to Ms. Prihandari for the answer. And that was the last question for the session. Give applause to all of us. Okay, so before we close the session, I would like to give my point of view of conclusion. Okay, now we are talking about Islam politics and the impact for government and society. Of course, we as the young generation, especially students, we have to take the responsibility too, right? For making the government and the society also working together. And we as youngsters, as a student, have to help the government and society for helping the deradicalization from terrorism and also giving approach for each other and making this world better without any terrorism again. Okay, so thank you for our speakers today. Thank you. I would like to say thank you for Miss Irene, for Professor Banlaoi, for Miss Prihandari, and for Dr. Ahmad. And thank you so much for your attention for the audience, students, and the speakers. I'm Nurfadila Andini as the moderator today. I apologize if I have so many mistakes during this session. And thank you guys for your attention this morning till this afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, I would like to give it back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much to our distinguished invited speakers for the prodigious presentation. And we thank you to Andin for guiding these plenary sessions. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda is closing.
Ladies and gentlemen, finally, we come to the end of this agenda. But before we close this agenda, I'd like to remind you to fill in the link of certificate. To all participants, please do not leave the room first and turn on your camera because we will take picture together. To the committee, please handle this photo session. For all participants, please give your best pose. Come to the first slide. Three, two, one, action. Give your best pose. Give your best pose. Move to the next slide. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. We are Prof. Kusuma Arum and also Muhammad Fahmi Idris as the student of Department Communication and Islamic Broadcasting, Faculty of Dakwah and Communication. As the Masters of Ceremony, we apologize you if we have a lot of mistakes. So let's close our agenda today by reciting Alhamdulillah together. Alhamdulillah. Rabbil Alamin. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. See you again.
Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you semua. Thank you. Thank you.
Because we will take picture together.
And don't forget to fill the present
kita bakalan ngisi link persepsi dan juga sertifikat, jadi teman-teman bisa langsung lihat nanti langsung diisi dulu sebelum keluar dari ruangan karena link persepsi dan juga sertifikat. Nggak kelihatan ya?
Kepada Bapak Ibu dosen diharapkan maju ke depan untuk sesi foto.
For all of the teachers, please stay in front of this theatrical because we want to take picture together. Okay, welcome to our lectures. Okay, for all the participants, please stand up because we want to take picture together. Okay, to all the students, if I said international webinar, you guys answer success. Oh, it's a wrap. It's a wrap aja nggak sih? If I said international webinar, you guys said it's a wrap. Nanya gitu ya, it's a wrap. Okay? Yeah. Okay. We are first. Like dulu gladi-gladi. International webinar. It's a wrap. Oke. Oke. Udah belum? Atau V aja po yang depan.
Dan dari gini aja deh. Gini. Kayak tadi ya, international webinar. Nggak kelihatan.
Oke, itunya Rommel. Ini putus. Okay, to all the participants, thank you for joining this webinar. If you want to go to the next class or if you want to leave this room, yeah.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Do not litter ya.
Bring your trash.
Bye.